The alarm on his phone would scream at 6:30 a.m. every morning, and David would reach out with a practiced, almost robotic motion, silencing it before it could fully wake the world outside his window. His apartment was the kind of place you'd see in a magazine. All clean lines, gray furniture, and not a single thing out of place. But it didn't feel like a home. It felt like a display room, and he was the mannequin who lived there. He'd shuffle to the kitchen, where the coffee maker was set on a timer, the smell of dark roast filling the silent space. He'd drink it black, standing at the counter, staring out at the city waking up below. He never really saw it, though. It was just a backdrop. His mind was already at the office, already scrolling through lines of code, already solving problems that wouldn't exist for another hour. His life had become a loop, a perfectly efficient sequence of events that led him from his bed to his desk and back again, with just enough time in between for a microwavable meal and a few hours of streaming shows he wouldn't remember the next day. He told himself this was what success looked like. He had a good job, a nice apartment, and money in the bank. But a quiet voice, a feeling he'd pushed down deep inside, would sometimes whisper, *, is this it? Is this all there is? He'd answer it by working a little later or by buying a new gadget he didn't need. Anything to fill the hollowness that seemed to be growing in the quiet moments. Then came the first time. It was a Tuesday, a particularly grueling day spent debugging a piece of software that seemed to have a personal vendetta against him. He fell into bed around midnight, his body heavy with exhaustion, his mind still buzzing with fluorescent lights and the quiet hum of servers. He slept, a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind of sleep you fall into when you're completely spent. And then something pulled him out of it. It wasn't a noise. There was no nightmare, no sudden crash, no dog barking. It was a silence. A silence so complete, so profound, that it was louder than any sound. His eyes snapped open and he was instantly, completely awake. Not groggy, not fuzzy, but wide awake, every nerve ending tingling. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the city filtering through the blinds. He turned his head slowly, his heart starting to beat a little faster, and looked at the clock on his nightstand. The red numbers glowed back at him, 3:33. He lay there for a moment, just breathing. He listened. He could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the distant wail of a siren miles away. But inside his apartment, in his bedroom, there was nothing. And it felt heavy. It felt like the air itself had thickened, like the darkness wasn't just an absence of light, but a presence. He had the strangest, most unnerving feeling that he wasn't alone. It wasn't a scary feeling, not like there was an intruder. It was more like he was being watched by something ancient and immense, something that didn't have eyes but could see right through him, down to the core of his tired, aching soul. He sat up, his feet touching the cold wooden floor. "Hello?" he whispered, the words sounding small and ridiculous in the thick silence. "Nothing," he shook his head, a wry, tired smile on his face. "You're losing it, man," he muttered to himself. It had to be stress. The project, the pressure, it was finally getting to him. He got up, drank a glass of water, and checked his phone. No new emails. No emergencies. Just the silent, glowing screen. He crawled back into bed, telling himself it was nothing, but he couldn't shake the feeling. He lay there for what felt like an hour, just listening to the quiet before he finally drifted back into a restless, uneasy sleep. 2 nights later, it happened again. He'd had a slightly better day, the code was finally cooperating, and he'd even managed to leave the office at a decent hour. He felt a small flicker of his old self, the person who used to enjoy cooking a real meal. He made pasta, ate it while watching a comedy special, and went to bed feeling almost normal. He fell asleep easily. And then, just like before, he was pulled from his sleep by that same unnerving stillness. His eyes opened. He didn't even have to look. He knew. He slowly turned his head to the clock. 3:33, a cold shiver traced its way down his spine. This wasn't a coincidence. This was something else. The feeling was the same, that sense of a vast, quiet presence in the room with him. It wasn't threatening, but it was powerful. It felt like the universe had stopped for a moment just to look at him, to really see him. And in that moment, he felt incredibly small, but also strangely seen. He didn't get up this time. He just lay there, his heart thumping a steady, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe his body clock was just messed up. Maybe it was a new kind of anxiety. But deep down, he knew that wasn't it. This felt different. It felt like a message was being delivered, but it was in a language he couldn't understand. It was a feeling, a vibration, a sense of profound importance that he couldn't quite grasp. It was like his soul was trying to hand him a note, but his mind was refusing to read it. The anxiety was there, a low hum under his skin, but there was something else too. A strange, piercing clarity. In the absolute quiet of that moment, all the noise of his daily life, the deadlines, the emails, the traffic, the meaningless chatter was gone. All that was left was him, in the dark at 3:33 in the morning. And he had no idea what to do. After the third time, the fear began to creep in. It was the weekend, and he'd stayed up a little later than usual, watching a movie, trying to quiet the part of his brain that was now dreading the night. He slept, and the wake-up call came right on schedule. 3:33 a.m. This time, a small gasp escaped his lips. He squeezed his eyes shut, wishing it away, but the feeling was still there, enveloping him. It was no longer just strange. It was starting to feel like a haunting. A very quiet, very polite haunting. He felt a surge of frustration. What did it want? Why him? He was just a guy, a regular guy trying to get by. He wasn't special. He didn't believe in ghosts or divine interventions or any of that stuff. He believed in logic, in code, in things that could be proven and explained. And this was unexplainable. The days that followed were a blur. He was running on fumes, his body aching for a full night's sleep that never came. He'd wander through his office in a daze, the numbers on his screen blurring into meaningless shapes. He'd drink cup after cup of bitter coffee, the caffeine doing little to pierce the thick fog of exhaustion that had settled over his mind. He became irritable, snapping at a coworker who asked him a simple question, then immediately feeling guilty. He felt disconnected from everyone and everything. Conversations felt like they were happening in another room. The world seemed to be moving at a different speed, and he was stuck in this slow, silent bubble of his own. His nights were no longer a refuge from his days. They had become the main event, the source of a quiet dread that grew a little stronger each time the clock flashed 3:33 a.m. He was trapped in a cycle. He couldn't escape. And the worst part was he had no idea why it was happening. He just knew that something, somewhere, was trying to get his attention. And it was starting to feel like it wouldn't stop until it did. The exhaustion was becoming a physical thing, a heavy coat he couldn't take off. It clung to him during his morning commute, a fog that blurred the faces on the train. It sat on his shoulders at his desk, making his arms feel like lead as he typed. He was a man who solved problems for a living, who untangled complex systems of logic and code. But this one problem, this waking up in the middle of the night, was a mystery he couldn't crack. His first attempts at a solution were practical, almost scientific. He was, after all, a man of logic. He ordered a white noise machine online, drawn in by the promise of soothing soundscapes and undisturbed sleep. When it arrived, he plugged it in and chose the ocean waves setting. The gentle, rhythmic crashing filled the sterile silence of his bedroom. That first night, he felt a flicker of hope. He fell asleep listening to the artificial tide. But then it happened. He woke with a jolt, not to the sound of waves, but to that same profound, unnerving stillness. The white noise machine was still humming its song, but it was just background noise, a flimsy curtain against the vast, quiet presence that had taken up residence in his room. He looked at the clock. 3:33. The machine was useless. Next, he attacked the problem from a different angle. He remembered reading an article about how caffeine can mess with your sleep cycle, even hours later. So he quit. Cold turkey. No more coffee afternoon. No more sodas. The first 2 days were a nightmare. His head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, and he was so irritable that a coworker asking him a simple question about a deadline made him want to flip his desk. He powered through, drinking herbal tea that tasted like hot water and disappointment. He told himself it would be worth it. He imagined a full, uninterrupted night of sleep, a dreamless, peaceful 8 hours. The night came. He went to bed, caffeine-free and cautiously optimistic. He slept, and at 3:33 a.m. his eyes snapped open. The silence was there, waiting for him. The headache from caffeine withdrawal was nothing compared to the wave of frustration that washed over him. He was doing everything right, everything the experts suggested, and it was making no difference at all. Finally, broken and desperate, he did something he rarely did. He went to the doctor. He sat in the sterile waiting room, flipping through a magazine from 3 years ago, surrounded by posters showing smiling families and warnings about the flu. When the doctor called him in, he explained everything the exact time. The strange feeling of being watched, the fact that it wasn't a nightmare but a complete, sudden awakening. The doctor was kind, but her eyes had the familiar look of someone running through a checklist. She asked about his stress levels, his diet, his exercise routine. She listened patiently, her pen tapping lightly on her prescription pad. "It sounds like it could be a few things," she said, her voice calm and clinical. "It could be anxiety-induced insomnia. Sometimes when we're under a lot of pressure, our bodies can develop these patterns. Or it could be a mild form of sleep apnea, where your breathing briefly stops and startles you awake." She handed him a pamphlet on sleep hygiene and another on managing stress. She suggested he try meditation and maybe consider a sleep study, but the waiting list was months long. He left the office with the pamphlets in his hand, feeling more alone than ever. The problem wasn't in a brochure. It wasn't something that could be fixed by breathing exercises or sleeping on his side. His problem felt bigger, more mysterious, and the medical world had no real answers for him. The wake-ups continued, each one chipping away at his resolve. He felt like he was losing his mind. One night, after the third or fourth consecutive 3:33 a.m. interruption, he gave up trying to go back to sleep. He was tired of fighting it. He was tired of lying in the dark, his heart pounding, waiting for the sun to rise. He sat up in bed, propped his pillows against the headboard, and reached for his tablet. The blue light of the screen illuminated his face in the darkness. He didn't know what he was looking for. He just needed a distraction, something to fill the silence in his head and the silence in his room. His thumb moved on its own, scrolling endlessly through a feed of other people's lives. Vacation photos he didn't care about, angry political posts that just made him feel more anxious, videos of cats doing funny things that he couldn't even bring himself to smile at. He was a ghost in the machine, a mindless consumer of content, floating in a sea of digital noise, and then a video title caught his eye. It was simple, almost silly. Keanu Reeves being the nicest human. He paused. He wasn't a huge movie buff, but there was something about the actor's face in the thumbnail, a kind of gentle, unguarded sincerity that made him tap on it. The video started. It was a compilation of short, grainy clips filmed by fans on phones. In one, Keanu was on a crowded subway, and when he saw an older woman standing, he immediately got up and offered her his seat, standing for the rest of the ride without a second thought. In another, he was on a movie set, sitting on the dirty ground with the rest of the crew, sharing a pizza and laughing with them like they were his oldest friends. There were clips of him patiently signing autographs for hours, of him stopping his car to help someone whose car had broken down. David watched, a strange feeling stirring in his chest. These weren't grand, heroic gestures. They were small, simple acts of kindness. Acts of noticing other people. Acts of being present. Then the compilation shifted. The lighting changed. The shaky phone footage was replaced by a professional press conference. An interviewer in the audience asked a question, something about his philosophy on life, how he dealt with the pressures of fame. Keanu leaned into the microphone, and for a moment he just looked thoughtful, as if he were really considering the question. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "I think the simple act of paying attention can change your life," he said. "So many people are just not there. They're waiting for the next thing. But the next thing is now. And if you miss it, it's gone." The words hit David with the force of a physical blow. It was like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. He replayed the sentence in his mind. Asterisk, so many people are just not there, asterisk, that was it. That was exactly how he felt. He was the man on the train, his body present, but his mind miles away. He was the man at his desk, going through the motions. He was always waiting for the next thing, the end of the workday, the weekend, the next vacation, while his entire life was happening right now, and he was missing it. He put the tablet down, the screen going dark, plunging the room back into shadows. But the darkness felt different now. The silence that woke him up every night wasn't a curse. It wasn't a symptom of a disorder. It was a wake-up call in the truest sense of the word. It was the universe, or God, or his own desperate soul, screaming at him, asterisk, pay attention. Be here now. You're not there. But you can be, asterisk. The words from the actor on the screen echoed in the sudden quiet of the room. He put the tablet down, its light extinguishing, and for the first time in weeks, the darkness of his apartment didn't feel like a threat. It felt open. The silence that had been waking him up every night wasn't a curse. It wasn't a symptom of a disorder his doctor could name. It was a wake-up call in the truest sense of the words. It was the universe, or God, or his own desperate soul, screaming at him, asterisk, pay attention. Be here now. You're not there. But you can be, asterisk. He sat there in the dark, the weight of that realization settling over him, but it wasn't a heavy weight. It was the light, solid weight of truth. All this time, he had been fighting it, trying to diagnose it, trying to make it go away. He saw it as an enemy, an intruder in his life. But it wasn't an intruder. It was him. It was the part of him that was still alive, the part of him that refused to die a slow death in a comfortable apartment and a soulless job. And it was fighting to be heard. The next day at work was different. The fog was still there, a lingering ghost of his sleepless nights, but now he could see the sun trying to burn through it. He found himself watching people, really watching them. He saw the way the receptionist's eyes crinkled when she smiled, the way his coworker tapped his pen nervously during a meeting, the way the janitor whistled a quiet tune as he swept the hallway. These were tiny, insignificant moments he would have never noticed before. He had always been too wrapped up in his own head, too focused on the next task, the next problem, the next thing on his to-do list. Now, these small moments felt like anchors, little glimpses of reality that were grounding him in the present. He was still tired, but it was a different kind of tired. It wasn't the bone-deep exhaustion of a man fighting a mysterious force. It was the fatigue of someone who had just run a mental marathon and was finally seeing the finish line. That night, he didn't try to distract himself with a movie or a show. He went home, ate a simple meal, and sat on his couch with his tablet. But this time, he wasn't scrolling aimlessly. He was searching. He became a reluctant student of this quiet, humble movie star. He watched more interviews, not the ones about upcoming films, but the ones where people asked him about life. He found a clip where Keanu talked about grief, about the people he had lost and how he carried them with him. Grief changes shape, but it never ends, he said, and the man felt a strange sense of comfort in that. He had his own small griefs, not of death, but of dreams he'd let go, of passions he'd abandoned, of the person he used to be. He had always pushed those feelings down, telling himself to be grateful for what he had. But hearing someone talk about loss with such honesty made him feel less alone in his own quiet sadness. He read articles and forum posts, stories from people who had met him. A story about how he had bought a whole ice cream cone just to give the first lick to a little fan who was staring at him. A story about how he had anonymously funded children's hospitals. The more he learned, the more he realized it wasn't about grand gestures. It was about a fundamental way of moving through the world. It was about seeing other people. It was about being present for the small, fleeting moments that make up a life. The warning from Keanu Reeves wasn't a prediction of doom. It was a warning against the slow, quiet death of a life unlived. It was a warning that you could have a nice apartment and a steady job and a bank account full of money, and still be completely, utterly empty inside. It was a warning that you could let your precious, finite, now, slip through your fingers, untended and unappreciated. Until one day you looked up and realized you had missed your own life. The next time he woke up, it was 3:33 a.m. He opened his eyes, and for the first time, there was no jolt of fear, no surge of frustration. There was only a quiet sense of recognition. The presence he felt in the room was still there, but it didn't feel vast and mysterious anymore. It felt familiar. It felt like himself. He didn't lie in bed and wait for it to pass. He got up. He walked out of his bedroom and into the living room, the floorboards cool under his feet. He didn't turn on a light. He just stood by the large window that looked out over the city. Below him, the world was a tapestry of tiny, glittering lights. Each light was a home, an office, a street lamp. Each light represented a life, a story, a series of nows happening all at once. He stood there in the darkness, the city sprawling out before him, and he finally understood. The wake-up call wasn't a punishment. It was a gift. It was an intervention. His life had become a comfortable, well-lit prison, and his own spirit had been rattling the bars, trying to get him to see that the door was unlocked all along. The silence wasn't an absence of sound. It was the space he needed to finally hear himself. The warning wasn't about some future catastrophe. It was about the quiet catastrophe that was already happening, the slow erosion of his own soul. He had been so busy waiting for the next thing, the next promotion, the next vacation, the next whatever, that he had forgotten how to live in the only time that was real, this one. He took a deep breath, the air cool and clean in his lungs. He knew what he had to do. He didn't have a plan, not yet, but he had a direction. He was going to stop waiting. He was going to start paying attention. He was going to be there. The long night was finally over, and for the first time in a very long time, he was ready for the morning. The morning after he stood by the window, watching the city sleep, the world felt new. It wasn't that the buildings had changed or the streets had rearranged themselves. It was him. He was different. When the alarm on his phone buzzed at 6:30 a.m., he didn't silence it with a robotic slap. He let it play for a moment, the sound just a sound, not an enemy to be defeated. He swung his legs out of bed, his feet touching the floor, and instead of shuffling to the kitchen on autopilot, he paused. He looked around his bedroom, really looked at it. He saw the way the early morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long, soft stripes on the wall. He saw the stack of books on his nightstand gathering dust that he'd been meaning to read for months. He felt a sense of gentle reacquaintance with his own life. In the kitchen, he went through the motions of making coffee, but his mind was present. He didn't think about work. He thought about the smell of the coffee beans, the rich, dark aroma that filled his small apartment. He listened to the gurgle and hiss of the machine, sounds he'd heard 1,000 times but never really heard. He took his mug to the window, just as he always did, but this time he didn't just stare blankly at the city below. He watched the sun rise. He watched as the first sliver of orange light crept over the horizon, painting the undersides of the clouds with strokes of pink and gold. It was a masterpiece that happened every single day, and he had been missing it. He felt a small pang of sadness for all the sunrises he had slept through, all the small moments of beauty he had been too busy or too distracted to notice. He took a sip of his coffee, and it wasn't just a bitter liquid to wake him up. It was warm and complex, and it was part of this moment. This now, that day at work, he felt a quiet confidence he hadn't felt in years. The old anxiety was still there, a faint whisper in the back of his mind, but it no longer had control over him. He was the driver now, not the passenger. When lunchtime came, he did something he hadn't done in years. He didn't eat at his desk, hunched over his keyboard, scrolling through news feeds while shoveling a sandwich into his mouth. He grabbed his jacket and walked out of the office. There was a small park a block away, a patch of green he had passed 1,000 times without ever really seeing it. He found an empty bench and sat down. He unwrapped his sandwich and just sat. He watched a young mother chase her toddler, who was squealing with delight as pigeons scattered around him. He watched an old man on another bench, meticulously tearing pieces off a loaf of bread and feeding them to a squirrel. He listened to the sounds of the city, the distant traffic, the chatter of people walking by, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. He felt the sun on his face, a gentle warmth that seemed to seep into his skin and loosen the knots of tension in his shoulders. He finished his sandwich, having tasted every bite. It was the most boring lunch he had ever had, and it was the most wonderful that evening. After a day that felt somehow longer and shorter at the same time, he found himself tidying up his apartment. It was something he usually did out of a sense of duty, a chore to be completed. But tonight it felt different. He was clearing out not just physical clutter, but mental clutter as well. In the back of his closet, tucked away in a box filled with old college textbooks, he found it. A worn, leather-bound sketchbook. He pulled it out, a cloud of dust puffing into the air. He ran his thumb over the embossed cover, a flood of memories rushing back to him. He remembered the person he used to be, a young man who dreamed of designing buildings that were not just functional, but beautiful structures that told a story. He remembered spending hours in this very sketchbook, lost in a world of lines and shadows, of perspectives and possibilities. He had been good at it too, but then life happened. The need for a steady job, the pressure to be practical, the slow, gradual compromise that had led him to a career writing code for systems he didn't care about. He had put his dreams in a box and tucked them away, just like this sketchbook. He sat down on his couch, the sketchbook in his lap. He hesitated for a moment, a flicker of the old self-doubt rising in his chest. Asterisk, what's the point? You're rusty. You were never that good anyway, asterisk, but he pushed the thought away. He wasn't drawing to become a famous architect. He was drawing for himself. He found a pencil in an old coffee mug on his desk, its tip still sharp. He opened the sketchbook to a blank page. The white paper seemed to stare back at him, both a challenge and an invitation. He put the pencil to the page. His hand felt clumsy, foreign. He tried to draw the view from his window, the buildings, the streetlights. The first few lines were shaky, unsure. It looked like a child's drawing. He almost stopped. But then he remembered the actor's words. Pay attention. He took a deep breath. He looked at the building across the street, not as a generic rectangle, but as a collection of details. He saw the way the light hit the brick, the pattern of the windows, the intricate ironwork on the fire escape. He started to draw again, not trying to create a perfect picture, but just trying to capture what he saw. He wasn't thinking about the past or the future. He was just there, in that moment, with a pencil in his hand and a world of details in front of him. He lost track of time. The city lights twinkled outside his window, and he didn't notice. The television was silent, and he didn't care. He was just drawing, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt a sense of peace that had nothing to do with sleep. He was heeding the warning. He was finally starting to live. Months passed, and the man who used to live in a display room now lived in a home. His apartment was no longer a testament to minimalism and order. It was a reflection of a life being actively lived. The walls, once a sterile gray, were now a gallery of his own making. His sketches were taped up everywhere, rough pencil drawings of cityscapes, detailed studies of leaves he'd found in the park, ambitious designs for buildings that existed only in his imagination. A collection of thriving plants, which he had somehow managed not to kill, sat on the windowsill, their green leaves reaching for the sun. The space felt messy, chaotic, and wonderfully, undeniably human. He hadn't quit his job. He didn't need to. His relationship with it had changed. He now went to the office, did his work, and left. He had drawn a firm line in the sand, telling his boss that weekends were for living, not for debugging. To his surprise, the world hadn't ended. The company had survived. He had even gotten a small, polite round of applause from his team when he told them he would no longer be answering emails after 7 in the evening. He was setting boundaries, not just with his job, but with the old version of himself who had been willing to give everything away for a sense of external validation. His weekends, once a black hole of boredom and recovery from the work week, were now filled with a gentle, purposeful activity. He had reconnected with an old friend from college, a man he hadn't spoken to in years. They had met for coffee and discovered they both felt a strange pull towards the mountains. So they joined a weekend hiking group. The first hike was torture. His body, accustomed to a chair and a keyboard, protested with every step. His lungs burned, his legs ached, and he thought he might die on the side of a hill. But when he reached the summit, panting and sweaty, and looked out at the vast expanse of green and blue under a brilliant sky, he felt a sense of accomplishment he hadn't felt from finishing any project at work. He started to look forward to those hikes. He loved the feeling of the earth under his feet, the smell of pine needles in the air, and the easy, unforced conversations with people who weren't talking about deadlines or server crashes. He was reconnecting with the world one step at a time. The 3:33 a.m. wake-ups had stopped, or rather they had transformed. There were nights, still, when he would open his eyes in the deep dark of the night and feel a familiar stillness. He would glance at the clock and see the glowing red numbers, 3:33, but the old, cold dread was gone. There was no jolt of fear, no surge of anxiety. Instead, a sense of calm would wash over him. He saw it now not as a mysterious disturbance, but as a moment of check-in, a quiet reminder from his own soul of the journey he had been on. Sometimes he would just lie there, a smile on his face, grateful for the peace. Other times he would get up, make himself a cup of herbal tea, and sit in the dark living room, just breathing. He would think about the man he used to be, the ghost who drifted through his own life, and he would feel a profound sense of compassion for him. He wasn't angry at his old self anymore. He just felt sorry for him. The silence in the night was no longer a void to be feared. It was a sanctuary, a space where he could connect with himself. Away from the noise of the world, he understood now that the warning from Keanu Reeves wasn't a direct message from the actor himself. It was something much more personal than that. The actor's words, spoken in a random interview he had stumbled upon during a moment of desperation, had been a key. They were a piece of wisdom that had unlocked the meaning of his own mysterious wake-up calls. The real warning hadn't come from a movie star. It had come from within. It was his own spirit, his own intuition, his own inner God screaming at him to wake up before it was too late. The warning was not about some future disaster. It was about the quiet, slow-moving disaster that was already happening, the slow death of his own soul, the wasting of his precious, finite time on a life that wasn't truly his. Keanu's words were just the language his own heart needed to finally understand the message it had been trying to send him all along. The story concludes on a quiet morning, months after his journey began. He wakes up not to the jarring buzz of an alarm, but to the soft, gentle light of dawn filtering through his blinds. The room is filled with a warm, golden glow. He lies in bed for a moment, just listening. He can hear the distant sound of the city beginning to stir, the first birds of the morning chirping outside his window. He takes a deep, slow breath, feeling the air fill his lungs. He feels a sense of gratitude so profound it almost brings a tear to his eye. He is grateful for the new day, for the pencil on his knitstand, for the plants on his windowsill, for the friend he will meet for a hike this weekend. And in a strange way, he is grateful for the long, dark nights that came before. He is grateful for the silence that once scared him, because he understands now that it was the only space quiet enough for him to finally hear himself. He gets out of bed, his feet touching the cool floor, and walks to the window to watch the sun finish its climb over the city. He is finally, truly awake in every sense of the word.